wherever you want to. I'm waiting for the signal from our camera guy before I can start. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nancy Ridley, and I'm serving as the interim city manager right now. And we have a fun-filled night ahead of you. Yeah, don't you wish, right? But to start us off, I'm going to introduce Sharon Tillman, who is this year's mayor of the City Commission, and she was the chair of the Appointments Committee when most of you were appointed in December and January. So she's going to say a couple words, and then I'll get us started.
Well, good evening. As Nancy said, I was chair of the Appointments Committee when you all were appointed in December, and I wanted to take the time to thank you for being willing to serve. I don't know if you read today's paper, but you'll see that nationwide volunteerism has tended to be dropping off. But fortunately, in Mount Pleasant, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I really want to thank you and the community in general for fostering a culture of wanting people to be involved, and while they're being involved, to care about their community. When we did finish with the appointments in December, I think it was the first time that we've had every single board and commission seat filled. And we want to continue that. We do have some applications on file, and I guess I'd like to take this opportunity, since it's being videoed, to encourage people who were not appointed this time to please submit applications, because we do keep those on file for a year. So again, I want to thank you, and I do think you will have some fun this evening. It's not all going to be just dull procedure and that sort of thing. And I do hope that you will enjoy the committees on which you serve. One last thing that I'd just like to say is, as your committees get up and running and you're into your year, if you do have some questions, some concerns, some stumbling blocks, roadblocks, whatever, please let us know, because we would like to do what we can to help our committees run the smoothest that they possibly can, and also let you know how much we value your input and your advice. So again, thank you.
Now, a couple of housekeeping issues before we get started. The reason we're filming this, just so you know, is, as the mayor indicated, we have vacancies that come up throughout the year. So what we do for those people who are appointed throughout the year, or people who couldn't make it tonight, we give them a link to the recording of this on YouTube so that they can watch it and get all the same information that you are getting tonight. So that's why we have it videotaped. So before we get started, just so everybody has a perspective of who's here, I thought it might be nice just to take a minute to kind of go around the room and have everybody stand up, introduce yourself, just say your name, which board or commission you're a staff liaison to, or that you've been appointed to, just so people can kind of put names and faces together. So Bill, if you could start out for us, if you stand up and do it, please. John?
I'm John Zang, W, and also liaison to the airport.
Liz Bush, I was just recently moved to the Parks and Rec. Michelle Sponsler, Downtown Development Director, and I'm staff liaison with Downtown Development Board and Historic District.
Chris, you want to start it? Yeah.
Chris Bundy, the staff liaison at Parks and Recreation.
We have Anthony Popper, I was responsible for Popper.
Brian Hinch, staff and some appeals and stuff.
I'm Lisa Harden, and I am on the Historical Commission and the ZBA. I'm Elizabeth Vandor, and I'm on the Historical Commission as well.
Mark, do you mind starting us in the front again?
I'm Mark Ransberger, and I was just appointed planning commission.
I'm Kathleen Lake, and I'm starting my 7th year on the city.
So thank you to each of you for coming out tonight on what's going to be another cold evening in downtown Mount Pleasant. And also thank you for your flexibility. As you well know, we were originally scheduled to do this in January, and due to the extreme weather we had that day, we made the decision to cancel it. So today is a little bit better than January 6th was, if you'll remember that, but it still is pretty cold. So I appreciate you venturing out again tonight after hopefully you had some dinner. Our plan for this evening is we've already done the first bullet, the welcome and the thanks for serving. I'm going to spend a couple minutes kind of giving a Government 101 overview just to make sure we all have the same starting point. Jeremy Howard, who's the city clerk, is going to give you some Robert's rules and some tips for running a meeting. Kathy Lang, the city commissioner, is going to give you the ethics discussion. And then we'll open it up for general questions about anything we've covered. And then probably one of the more valuable parts of it is we'll break out into the actual groups that you have been appointed to, and you can meet with the staff liaison and get any specific details about the group you've been appointed to. When we did this last year, we got through this whole presentation part in about an hour. So our goal is to get it done in less than an hour this year, because I know that you are busy people. So we will move through it as quickly as we can. And if you have a burning question, feel free to raise your hand, but otherwise we'll try to keep the questions at the end if possible. So Government 101, I'm going to cover basically 4 things. I'm going to talk about our form of government, talk a little bit about the organizational chart, the types of boards, commissions, and committees we have that you are all serving on, and then the role that you have as being a member of that committee or board or commission. So first of all, for the form of government, cities, villages, and townships are all creatures of the state. If the state constitution doesn't say we can exist, then we can't exist. And the structure of a city particularly is always a very conscious decision, and it's actually spelled out in the city charter about how the government will be formed. And the most common ones for a city are a strong mayor, a weak mayor, or a council manager form of government. And in the city of Mount Pleasant, our charter writers and then the citizens who approved our charter chose the council manager form of government as our form within the city of Mount Pleasant. And this form was actually introduced in the United States in the early 20th century, but it's become probably the most prevalent form of government among cities throughout the United States. And it's also widely used in Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, which is kind of interesting. I had the opportunity to go to a national conference last fall, and there were people from these various countries there, and I was just so amazed that our form of government is that common. And our form of government is based on the premise, basically, of combining political leadership with strong managerial experience, and I think that's why our framers chose that for us. So in the council manager form of government, as most of you know, we have an elected commission, which is 7 nonpartisan members from across the entire city. They aren't elected by wards or precincts, they're all at large. And they serve staggered 3-year terms with 2 elected each year, and then every 3rd year we have 3 that are up for election. Then those 7 pick the mayor amongst the 7 of them, and they do that at their first meeting of the year. They actually pick the mayor and vice mayor through an election process. And in our form of government, the mayor basically runs the meetings and then performs ceremonial functions. And really the only independent authority that the mayor has in the city of Mount Pleasant that no other commission member has is they have the authority to marry people. So if you ever know somebody who needs to be married in the city limits, you can call our offices and we can try to set that up with the mayor, which is kind of interesting. Now the city council then appoints the city manager and then appoints all of you to the boards and commissions. The role of each is similar to a corporate board of directors. The council or commission is kind of like a board of directors in a typical corporate structure. They set the vision, they have the legislative powers to make laws and ordinances. As I mentioned, they hire the city manager, and then they approve the budget and the appropriations for each of the departments to spend, and then they set broad-based policy. Once they've hired the city manager is more responsible for the day-to-day activities, so the city manager and all of the staff throughout the city are responsible for implementing the policy and the vision, hiring and supervising the employees, proposing the budget, and being one of the advisors to the City Commission. The advantages to this system are really that, I believe, it combines the strong political leadership of elected officials who are elected by the people they serve with the strong managerial experience of a local government manager. So it's really not a balance of power between two divergent entities, but it's really a representative system where the policy power is with the commission, and then and it's concentrated equally among all 7 of those, and then the responsibility for the day-to-day is shifted to the staff. So in Mount Pleasant, the organizational chart, I don't expect you to read the words on this, but the important part to know is at the top is our city residents, which is where everything starts because they do the election of the city commission. Then they elect the 7 city commissioners who are in the middle at the top of that chart. And then all of you are to the right and the left. That's all of our boards and commissions. We actually have 20 different boards and commissions that different people serve on. And then from the city manager down is the staff that's more responsible for the day-to-day operations. So on those 20 boards and commissions that are to the left and the right, that's over 100 people that volunteer to serve to help our community out. And each board or commission has separate responsibilities, but they all have the exact same mission. And that mission is to assist the city to stay healthy and prosperous and a place where people want to live, work, and play. So we all have the same end goal, we just have a different piece of the puzzle in that whole end goal. And each board of commission, as you heard as these people introduce themselves, is served by a professional staff member that acts as your liaison. So basically, our boards and commissions are in 3 basic categories. We have those that I would call are legislatively mandated, whereby the state law allows or requires them to exist. And they function like authorities. Well, their authorities are usually spelled out in state law, and sometimes they're replicated in our local charter. And examples that fall under this category, which is where many of you are from, as I heard you introduce yourself, the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Fire and Police Retirement Board, Building Authority, Board of Review, Chippewa River District Library, and the Principal Shopping District. So that's the first category. The second category is really a quasi-public, almost an independent entity, and these are created by the city, but they're totally empowered by state law, and the state law dictates most of what these boards and commissions do. And the primary control that the city commission has, other than who to appoint to them, is really exercised only at the budget level. And so those are the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, the Local Finance Development Authority, Downtown Development Authority, Tax Increment Finance Authority, and Economic Development Corporation. And I don't think anybody from any of those boards is here tonight, so we don't have anybody in those categories. I said there were 3 categories, there's actually 4. The third one is what I would call the charter or ordinance mandated. There's something in our local laws that require us to have this grouping of committees or commissions, and that's the Parks and Rec Commission, the Historic District Commission, the Building, Fire, and Sanitary Sewer Board of Appeals, and the Local Officers Compensation Commission, which again, many of you are here for tonight. And then the last category is really an advisory committee, and these functions are generally spelled out in a resolution by the City Commission or in a motion that they passed. And they're generally to study or advise and recommend to the City Commission. And the categories there are the Airport Advisory Board, the Audit Committee, and then sometimes we have ad hoc advisory committees. Oops, I didn't put any of them down. But some examples of those that we've had in the recent years were, we had a fluoride task force a couple of years ago, and then just last year, that's still an active committee, is we have an international relations committee that's working on our sister city visit with Okaya, Japan. So those are generally short-term in nature when they're an ad hoc advisory committee. Sometimes we have city seats on other governmental boards, generally through an intergovernmental agreement or because another entity has asked us to appoint somebody. And the rules and terms of those boards are generally spelled out by that other entity. And some examples of that are the Central Dispatch Board, Cultural and Recreation Commission, Isabella County Transportation Commission, and the Isabella County Material Recovery Facility. So there's a kind of the broad categories, but regardless of where the authority comes from, every member is expected to do a number of things, and I guess I would say there's 3 things every member is expected to do, regardless of which board you serve on. Obviously, we want you to carry out the authority that's granted to your board or commission. We want you to advise the city commission, and we want you to help educate the public. So those are the 3 most important roles that I think you have. And you can do all of that best if you do a couple of things, and that's part of what tonight is about. We're hopeful that before you get to the meeting, you will read and review any reports that are given to you so that you can be prepared for the meeting. We're hopeful that you'll run an orderly meeting, which is part of why Jeremy's going to go through some Robert's Rules tips. We're hopeful you'll behave in an ethical manner, which is why Kathy Ling's going to go over our ethics policy. And then we hope you'll receive and provide feedback to your staff liaison or the commission in your areas of responsibility. I thought I had one more slide. I do have one more thing to say, even though there's not a slide. So one thing that your authority never does extend to is you, and you'll hear some of this in the ethics discussion, as an individual member of the board, you don't have the ability to make any promises or commitments as an individual member of that board or committee. That's really a violation not only of the ethics policy, but of many state mandates. You obviously can't hire or terminate staff as being a board member, and you can't overtake the role of the city commission, obviously. So there's some things you can't do, but you still, don't leave here for a minute thinking you don't play a vital role in what we need from you. You operate as a critical part of the feedback loop between the citizenry, the developers, the users of our services, the professional staff, and the elected officials. So we certainly couldn't do it without you. So that's your Government 101 for the night. So with that, I am going to sit down and quietly listen to Jeremy as he goes through Robert's Rules stuff.
All right, I am going to be talking about a riveting topic tonight that everybody loves to talk about. It often can be, yeah, please, if you can hand those out. I do have handouts there they'll be handing out. The handouts that you are going to be having handed to you are a little more in-depth even than what I'll be going through tonight, so you'll see that I'm skipping over some slides in the packet that you have. That's just so you can have some other references if you go back. These slides are also pretty detailed too, so it's again another tool so you can go back and look at the slides to see if you've forgotten what we talked about tonight. But hopefully we can take this sometimes confusing, sometimes boring topic, make it a little bit understandable and a little bit maybe fun if all goes well. So what is parliamentary procedure? Parliamentary procedure is just simply the formal procedures that any deliberative assembly uses to present and discuss possible courses of action and make decisions in order to keep order. Basically, the rules of democracy. I'm sure we've all heard them in history classes or been taught by Commissioner Ling in a history class on what those are. They're commonly accepted ways in which groups of people can come together to conduct their business. Benefits of parliamentary procedure: they enhance leadership credibility. As each of you are taking your places on the board, they lend a sense of credibility if you're following these rules. They often will produce faster and more efficient meetings if they're used correctly. That's the end goal. And they prevent illegal actions, as we don't want to be doing something that we're not supposed to be doing, either by state law or some other charter law or ordinance law. And if they work well, they also help improve communication skills between board members and the public. Basic principle of it, it's very simple actually. You want to end up at being courteous to everybody and have justice for all. I always say, if everybody is heard, everybody understands what's going on, most of the time you're following Robert's Rules of Order. It's important that there's only consideration of one subject at a time. That's to keep things on track and to not be confusing both to you sitting on the board and to the public that happens to be in the audience. The rights of the absent members are protected under Robert's rules. Those who are unable to attend, absent from the board, or absent in the public. The two key points, I think, are that the minority must always be heard. You want to make sure that that minority voice is heard, but in the end, it's the will of the majority that must prevail. So you want to hear the minority, but you want the majority to prevail. Quorum, very, very simple. Most boards have a quorum set by their bylaws. You can talk to your individual staff liaisons about what those quorums are set for your specific board. It's just how many members must be there at present to conduct business. Quorum is often established by charter or by bylaws. With the City Commission, it's established by city charter. You see here, City Charter Article 2, Section 15E establishes that 4 commissioners shall be a quorum for the commission to meet. How to act during a meeting. Well, it's always important to speak loudly and clearly, especially if you're not in a place that has microphones. If there's public there, you want to be able to, talk loud enough so that the public can hear what you're saying, so it doesn't look like there's anything going on that is behind closed doors, because it's an open meeting. You want to be recognized by the chair. Some of your boards will have a chair, some will have the mayor. It just depends on the type of board that you have. Be recognized by that person running the meeting before you start speaking. Remain quiet while others are speaking. Most of the stuff we learned in kindergarten follows the same all the way through these rules. Address others by their title and avoid first names. That's just kind of, Robert's Rule recommends doing that just to kind of remain a certain level of decorum and respect during the meeting. Discussion should be with the board members only. This is an important one based on the fact that during most of the conduct during the meeting, there is discussion amongst board members, but it is not necessarily a time for debate between public and board members. That's very important. There are definitely times during most meetings that I'll talk about later here that the public has an opportunity to speak, usually multiple times. And even then, that's not time for debate. That's time for the public to present their case, and then you move on and say thank you for your thoughts, and go on with the meeting rather than getting into some kind of back and forth debate. If you must leave the room, request permission. That's, again, pretty simple stuff. Cell phone procedures. This didn't used to be as much of a problem. Obviously now, pretty much everybody has a cell phone in their pocket. Refrain from using cell phones during the meeting at all if possible. Obviously there's emergencies sometimes, but no texting during the meetings, no emailing or phone, computer use during the meetings. At City Commission meetings, all the commissioners, I'm sure you've seen, have laptops at the dais. Those are all certainly capable of emailing and doing all those things, but we don't do any of that during the meeting, because all communications, and this is what you want to remember, if you're texting or communicating or emailing or doing any of that kind of stuff during a meeting, that all would fall under communications that become a public record, would fall under FOIA and all kinds of other issues that go along with that. So be on the safe side, just leave it in your pocket. An agenda. Almost all of your boards and commissions will have some sort of an agenda. That agenda sets out the order in which those specific items are to be considered throughout the meeting, and they must be approved by a majority vote, usually right after the start of the meeting. Most of the time there's a vote to approve the agenda, or some manner that's done. Depends on the type of board you're on. City Commission often does it by unanimous consent, which I'll speak on in a little bit. Once approved, that agenda is the board's. They control that agenda. It's what they're going to be doing that night. There's usually times to add and remove things, but that is the property of that board and that assembly once it's approved. Basic standard order of business for most meetings. I put these in here. This is kind of what you're going to see at most of your meetings, give or take a few things. Some boards have different things. Some boards may call something slightly different. But for the most part, this is what you're going to see in most of your meetings. There'll be a call to order at some point, whatever meeting time you have set. Pledge of Allegiance, most likely. You'll see that in all the commission meetings. Then there's usually a roll call. Sometimes this is just a simple, yes, everybody's here. Sometimes it's actually a voice, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Proclamations and presentations. Almost in most of yours, you'll have some sort of format for that, to do a proclamation on Martin Luther King Day or whatever else has happened to be going on, or a presentation being made to your board from either public or staff or anybody else that has a place in that presentation section. Then normally approval of the agenda at that point. That's usually next. The next thing on there is the public input on agenda items. That's typically where the public can speak to things that are on the agenda. So anybody that wants to speak on something that will be talked about during the meeting, that would be the time that they would do that, come up and talk to you as the board on those agenda items. Receipt of petitions and communications, again, just a simple, staff recommendations, those type of things, simple staff communications, not recommendations, would be in that section. Next, public hearings. If there's any public hearings that need to be held, then staff recommendations, any formal actions, motions that need to be made if it's a board that actually takes actions and make motions. Might be called new business, old business. There's some different ways that might be placed on your agenda. There's usually a time for announcements where the board members, commission members can actually make announcements to each other, announcements to the public, just the members of the specific board doing that at that point. And then another public comment time. It's important to make sure that the public has their voice. They can speak at this point on any agenda item that has happened during the meeting or any other item that they would like to bring up that was not on the agenda. And then before the adjournment, you can typically have any number of these things. You could have recesses, you could have work sessions, and you can have closed sessions. You may or may not have one or all of those at any given meeting. A little bit about motions, defining emotions. A motion is a formal proposal for consideration and action. Only one subject considered at a time, as I mentioned before, and then no main motion can be made while another motion is before the assembly. Just simply, one thing at a time, pretty simple. And to make a motion, most often done by some type of phrase, I move that, I recommend that, some sort of motion like that. Seconding of a motion is important. You need a seconder to second that motion. After it's been seconded, normally, especially if it's a complicated motion, it will be restated by the chair in some format, either simply or read back by the chair or the mayor. After that point, after it's been motion and seconded, that's when the debate of the motion can occur. And that's when you want to wait to debate those things. You want to make sure that you're not debating before a motion and a second has been made. You can ask a clarifying question maybe, but to get into true debate on the issue, make sure that that motion and second, and there's actually something on the table to talk about. Voting after that, obviously everybody has the vote, and voting can be done in a multitude of different ways. Real quick, 8 steps in processing a motion. Obviously, the first person makes that motion, gets the mayor or chairperson's attention and asks to make that motion. There's a second after the mayor has recognized that person by name and has allowed them to speak. The member states their motion, I move that. Another member seconds the motion either by raising their hand, and the chairperson can say, seconded by person X, or they can simply say second. Depends on your board. Some boards like to use voice seconds. Some boards like to use just motions. After that, the chair states the motion, places it before the commission or the board for discussion. It's moved and seconded that, whatever that is. Is there any discussion? Discussion can be 10 seconds or it could be 10 hours, depending on how long you want to debate the question. Members have the right to get recognition and debate the motion. During that debate, subsidiary motions, things like amend, refer, postpone, also come into play and may be introduced to help the assembly make a final decision. After all those things have happened, after all the debate is concluded, the chair puts the question to a vote. You have a few different choices, yes, no, or abstaining, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But just a reminder that not voting either for or against is the same thing as voting in favor. Sometimes that gets confused with, I'm not going to say anything, so that means I'm abstaining. But if there's no vote, that is counted as a vote in favor of. So silence gives consent. Chair announces the result of the vote. This is kind of an important one often, just to make sure that the public understands what just happened. The chair or the mayor can say, the affirmative, the negative, although most of the time, most motions are made in the positive to make them a little easier to understand. And then the public knows what just passed. And then you can move on to the next agenda item. A few types of motion. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just a couple of the important ones. Obviously, a main motion is what brings new business or a specific agenda item to the assembly to be considered. Subsidiary motions then can change that motion. Things like amend and postpone and some of those other secondary motions that play a role on changing that specific first motion. There's also privileged motions and incidental motions. I'll let you look at those if you have questions on them. They don't often come up, especially in a more informal board or commission. Motion to amend, this one does actually happen quite a bit. You'll probably experience that at some point as you serve on these boards. They serve basically to insert, strike out, remove, do all kinds of things to that main motion to improve the wording of the original motion, clarify a motion. Somebody may say, you said, the date was, February 3rd, isn't that supposed to be February 7th? Or, I think maybe we'd want to do it at a different time. Can we amend this motion to be at March 11th or whatever it is? So just simple little amendments. The key to those is they must be voted on at the time that that's made. It requires a motion and a second. Once the motion and the second has been made, then you can move on and look at the original motion as amended, and that takes another vote. So you need 2 votes when there's an amendment involved. Postpone, again, temporarily suspends further action on pending question to a specific date or time, or even until a specific action can occur until this study is completed or some other specific thing. Again, I'm just going to skip through these. Call the orders today, commit, refer. Those are not as frequent. Postpone indefinitely occasionally happens. It's one of those where if it does come up, it actually rejects the main motion without bringing it to a direct vote. It's one of those, if a board or commission is looking at something and they really don't want to talk about it ever again, they can postpone it indefinitely. And then it means it doesn't come back at any point, and it more or less is dead unless somebody brings it back up down the road as a reconsider or as a new motion. But it pretty much just kills it. Motion to reconsider, again, can happen occasionally if someone wants to change, although it needs to be done by the prevailing side, whichever side was the winning side on that vote. And it wouldn't necessarily even have to be the majority. For instance, if you need a 2/3 vote, you may have a vote where the minority, and as far as number, actually won the vote, but that side is the one which would need to bring that up. That prevents someone from failing their motion, just saying motion to reconsider over and over and over again, trying to get that motion to pass. Again, limit or extend debates, suspend the rules. Don't happen very often, but they're there if you want to take a look at them. Votes are often done by voice, but can be done by taking a roll call. Depends on your board. Commission often does voice, except for where required. They do a roll call vote. Some boards do specifically roll call votes most of the time. 3 responses you can have, either for it, you're against it, or you abstain. And I think most likely Commissioner Ling will be talking about abstaining and some of the ethics that are involved with that. But members may only abstain if there's a distinct conflict of interest. So in other words, you don't get to abstain just because you don't want to make a decision or you just don't feel like voting on it. There has to be an actual conflict of interest in order to abstain. Unanimous consent, kind of a handy little thing you might see come up. Mostly it's used as an easy way to pass a motion, something as simple as passing an agenda. You can simply say, does everybody agree that this is what we want our agenda to be set as tonight? If that's the case, then you can just pass that by unanimous consent. But if even one person says, I disagree, I don't agree with that, then that forces the issue to go through the whole motion second, take a vote on it. There's plenty of books out there if you're really interested in reading all the details on Robert's Rules of Order. These are some of the books that you can actually go out and buy. I have most of these in my office. And you can certainly take a look at the ones I have if you're, really bored one day. So it's an interesting read. Some of the abridged ones are much better and easier to read. And there's actually a CD-ROM that I use most of the time because it's keyword searchable. And I can certainly answer a lot of questions using that. A couple of websites if you want to check those out as well. And I think we'll just do questions at the end if anybody has any specific questions. So now Commissioner Ling will be talking about ethics.
Good evening. It's always a little challenging when I'm back here because I'm so short, but it is important that we be able to talk into the microphone. I also want to thank you very much for coming this evening. As Ms. Ridley pointed out, it isn't quite as cold as it was the night that we had to cancel and postpone it, but it's still pretty cold. It was 16 as I was driving here, so we are going to try to get you out at a decent hour. As both Jeremy and Ms. Ridley said, sometimes it's not all that interesting to talk about the structure of government, parliamentary procedure, although they certainly did a very good job with it. But ethics can be pretty interesting. I mean, you could spend a whole evening talking about ethical issues. Anybody who watches television knows that right now there are all kinds of ethical questions. I mean, I had TV on this afternoon. Now, there's a lot of discussion of Governor Christie. There are ethical questions involved there, both in terms of the government and also the coverage, the press coverage, what should be covered, what shouldn't be covered. I don't know how many of you are Woody Allen fans, but that whole question of Woody Allen, should you be a fan, should he have gotten an award, a lifetime award or not, the ethics of that have been raised by a stepdaughter, an adopted daughter who claims that she was sexually abused. And there's been a lot of discussion of that. And the question is, what was the right thing for the Golden Globes group to do? Should they have given a Lifetime Achievement Award? And I'm not going to try to answer that question. I don't think there is necessarily a right or wrong answer to that question. There's going to be lots of different opinions on it. That's what ethics is really about. Because on the one hand, one could say, well, ethics just means doing the right thing. Just do the right thing. Follow the law. But what is the right thing? When it came to the Golden Globe giving out their Cecil B. DeMille Award, there's no law about who they can give the award to. There's just what's the right thing to do in this situation. And it's not easy to answer that question. Fortunately, frequently you're not going to be dealing with that level of question, but you will, as a member of a board, sometimes have to ask yourself, what is the right thing to do? And that's the reason why we talk about the Code of Ethics. Now, hopefully I can make this work. I'm not the tech person that Jeremy is, so you won't see fancy slides up here, but it will at least keep us going. Ethics, doing the right thing, but what is the right thing? Agreed upon laws and moral tenets. There are some things that in general, as a society, we agree on. Thou shalt not kill. That's a tenet. Most countries have a law that says thou shalt not kill. Most religions, as a moral tenet, believe thou shalt not kill, but it's not always that simple. Thou shalt not kill. Well, what about war? What about self-defense? What about the use of drones by the U.S. government? That's a huge question being debated by Congress, by the American people. What's the right or wrong thing to do? Thou shalt not steal. But you have examples of Les Mis, the question of stealing bread to feed the family. Was that right or wrong? Should someone's whole life be ruined because they stole bread in order to feed their family? I used to, when I taught government, talk about an issue, a problem that is sometimes used in ethics class about what if your child is dying of a disease where there is a medicine that will cure him. You can get your hands on that medicine. You'd have to pay $10,000 for it. You don't have $10,000 for it. If you steal it, you will save your child's life. Should you steal it or shouldn't you steal it? I'm not going to answer that question either, but that's an example. Honor thy father and mother. I put that one on there because, remember, a year ago we had a situation where There was a girl on campus who was being pursued, had been kidnapped, was in a car, the car was going down the road, I think old 27. The person got out, went up to the door. There were just kids at home. Those kids had been told, keep the door locked, never let anybody in, never let a stranger into the house. They let her into the house. It saved her life. They got an award as a result of that. And tell the truth. We've just had Christmas. We all got gifts. There probably weren't too many of us who said, ugh, I hate that tie. I hate that gift. All of us sometimes make diplomatic statements that perhaps are not telling the truth, but are the best way to handle a particular situation. It's because there's a gray area when you're dealing with ethics. Lots of municipalities have decided to have a code of ethics that are designed to say, at least for our city, in these situations, this is the way in which we define what is ethical behavior. It started in 2006. Bruce Kilmer was a candidate in 2006 running for the city commission, and he ran on a platform that said we should have a code of ethics. The Planning Commission actually proposed a sample draft for the city to consider in 2009 because of some issues that had been raised on the Planning Commission. The first draft of what the Code of Ethics that we now have was done by our legal firm, Clark Hill, in April of 2010. And it was passed in January of 2011. After we got feedback, one of the things the commission likes to do is to get feedbacks from our various boards and commissions. So we did send the examples of the draft to the various boards and commissions to ask for their input, and we got some very valuable input from some of the various boards because they're dealing with these issues on a regular basis, and therefore we're in a position to give us some very valuable advice on the best thing to do. The principles we followed were these: as short and clear as possible. There is no model code of ethics for the state of Michigan. The Michigan Municipal League has models of lots of different kinds of ordinances and codes, but they do not actually have a model for a code of ethics because it depends on the situation, it depends on the size of the city. There are lots of things that may affect what makes the best code of ethics. Some of them, when I was on the committee that put together the original draft, some of them are 20 or 30 pages long. Some of them are just a couple pages. Mike Estreva, who's on the Planning Commission, his suggestion was all you need is a simple sentence: do the right thing. But we did decide to go with a little bit more than that. Appropriate for a community of our size and circumstances. Fair. It's a tool for encouraging ethical behavior, but not a tool to get someone. The idea is just to say, these are our expectations. We expect that people will, knowing that, will follow those expectations. All of this, codes of ethics deal with the concept of civic virtue. What is, as a citizen, what is the right thing to do, particularly when you're serving in a public office? What is the right thing to do? The Romans had a definition of civic virtue, and their definition was putting the common good above your own individual interests. And on the other side of the world, about 1,500 years later, the Iroquois, in the Iroquois Confederacy Constitution, had a definition of civic virtue. And their definition is, in all your official acts, self-interest shall be thrown into oblivion. I find it very interesting that those two ideas were on opposite sides of the world, 1,000 years apart from each other, virtually say exactly the same thing. I think that makes it a pretty standard definition of what does it mean to be a good citizen. Why a city code of ethics? It helps ensure accountability to the electorate. It helps to ensure officials advance common interests, not their own interests. A local policy can more clearly define required and prohibited conduct, include a process to ensure fairness for the affected official and the public, provide sanctions to motivate compliance, and reflect unique local concerns. And that's why in January of 2011, we passed the Code of Ethics. And I'm going to ask that Nancy and Jeremy pass them out. And what I'm going to do, once I've passed them out, is I'm going to encourage you to take it home and read it. I'm not going to sit here and read through it. That would be pretty boring, even though it is pretty short, only 5 pages, but nonetheless, it would be pretty boring to sit and read through the whole thing, and I'm sure all of you are capable of reading it at home. But what I would like to do is to highlight what are those things that caused the most discussion. When we had an ad hoc subcommittee, really, that's what the Code of Ethics Committee was with the City Commission, and there were 3 of us on that committee, along with Mr. Scott Smith, who was our attorney, and we spent a long time. We probably spent 3 to 4 months going over various drafts, debating language like conflict of interest and private gain, because there's lots of different ways in which you can define that. And so what I'd like to do is to sort of focus on those things that we spent the most time talking about. And that's going to start on the first page with definitions. And obviously one of the most critical issues when you're dealing with Code of Ethics is, what do you mean by conflict of interest? So that's first definition I'm going to have us take a look at is conflict of interest. Conflict, and that was the thing we debated more than anything else as we were putting together this Code of Ethics. Conflict of interest means one or more of the following situations. A decision to be made by the city body on which the official serves, or in the case of the city commissioner, a decision to be made by any city body, could result in private gain for the official, a member of the official's household, or a member of the official's immediate family residing outside the official's household. So basically, the essence of that definition is it will result in private gain, and that private gain is either to you personally or to a direct relative, someone living in the household or an immediate relative living outside the household. Or B, a decision to be made by the city body on which the official serves, which could result in private gain for, 1, anyone the official represents as an attorney, accountant, or other professional; 2, an entity on which the official serves as an officer, director, or for a limited liability company or partnership as a member; or 3, unless the interest is held in a manner so that the official does not directly control the number of shares, portion of the ownership interest, or its value, an entity in which the official either owns more than 10% of the total stock or other ownership interest in the entity, or has an interest totaling $50,000 or more. Subsection 1 does not apply to an attorney, accountant, or other professional whose client is only a lender on the project. That is really saying other ways in which you might have a private gain. If you own more than 10% of a corporation, then that's the same thing as you're owning it yourself. You're getting private gain from it, and therefore you have something to benefit. That's really what that's trying to describe. So then, of course, the question becomes, what is private gain? And that's another definition. So if you look at page 2, under private gain, it says private gain means any direct financial benefit that is different than any financial benefit members of the general public or a significant group of the general public would gain in similar circumstances. And then there's a footnote that sort of explains that. In other words, the example that I used last year was, suppose that I am an avid biker, and I'm on the Planning Commission, and there is a question of whether or not a bike shop should open. Well, if I'm a biker, I might be very excited about the fact that a bike shop is going to open and have some place in which I'm now going to be able to buy bikes and other equipment. And so one might say, well, you're going to gain from that. But you're not getting any financial gain from that, and your gain isn't any different than any other person in the city who is a biker. So you're not getting any specific gain that's any different than anybody else. It has to be something where it's your particular gain. So if you're on the Planning Commission and it's your bike shop, then obviously there's going to be a conflict, and you need not to vote on that. Or if it's your son's bike shop, you're related in some way. And there could potentially be other ways in which you would get a direct private gain. So it's the private gain, and generally speaking, it's a financial gain. There is some financial gain that you're going to get as a result of that vote. That is the primary thing that is dealing with. Okay. The second thing I want to look at is standards, which is 5. So on the second page, right under private gain, that's the end of the definitions. Those are the standards. The standards are basically what says this is what you should be, these are the things that are okay to do, these are things that you should be concerned about. The first one is compliance. You need to comply with the rules and regulations and laws of the city. So for example, if you are on the Planning Commission, and you happen to be a person who is building something, it would be a really bad idea for you not to bother to get a building permit, because, even though you're on the Planning Commission, because you're supposed to be representing the kind of behavior that everybody should be following, and part of that is getting a building permit. So, and following the various laws that are involved with the kinds of things that you're regulating. If you're on the Parks and Recreation Commission, you shouldn't be using the facilities of the park without paying the fee if there are fees that should be paid. So you need to be aware of, and I'm sure none of you in here would do that, whether you're on the commission or not on the commission, but if you're on a commission, you need to be sensitive. So for example, I will give my son, Dwayne, an extremely hard time when he carelessly throws things in the recycling bin. And the reason for that is not that it's a big deal, but I'll say, I'm on the city commission. It's embarrassing to me to have the recycling guys go by and to be constantly taking things out and saying, you're not following the code. You put this in and you put this in and you're not supposed to be doing that. Just because my feeling is, at least I ought to know, although one of the reasons we set up a recycling task force was because sometimes it's awfully hard to figure out what you can put in and what you can't put in, but that's a different story. But anyway, you need to follow, you need to know what the rules of the city are and you need to follow them. 2, if you have any confidential information, there's a lawsuit going on, for example, and you go into closed session in order to discuss that lawsuit, so you have confidential information, it is improper for you to share that confidential information with anyone. 3, representation. Actually, Ms. Ridley also talked about that. You as an individual on a commission, whether it's on the City Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Parks and Recreation, you can speak for yourself. You cannot speak as if you represent the commission. And it's best to be careful about speaking to the media about an issue that is in front of the board. And if you do, it's very important to make it clear when you're expressing your own views and not giving the impression that you are expressing the opinion of the group, unless the group has authorized you. If you're the chairperson of the group and you've been authorized to explain what the commission is thinking or why they're having a meeting, that's different. But if you haven't been authorized to represent the group, then it's very careful to make sure that you make it clear that it's your own opinion. There's a lot of explanation of that, but that's basically what it says. On 4, city resources, this is like, I mean, I'm sure everybody in here is in a profession where there's a code of ethics, and almost all of those codes of ethics would say any equipment that you're using that belongs to your employer, you can't abscond with, and that's all resources is saying, is you can't use resources that belong to the city as your own. Sometimes that would also involve things like if you're working with the building inspector and there's a fee to have the building inspector come over to your house, of course it's not really okay to say, wink, wink, would you be willing to come over and look at this for me, and I'm not going to pay the fee for it. So that's, in terms of resources, that's really what that's talking about. You can't accept gifts. Loans of money, goods or services, or other things of value which may tend or may reasonably appear to be intended to influence the manner in which the official performs his or her duties. We gave the definition of private gain, and then 6 talks about specifics of what it means to have a private gain. An official shall not vote, act upon, participate in any discussion, or, except as provided below, engage in any communication regarding any matter for which he or she knowingly may realize any private gain or regarding which he or she has a potential conflict of interest. So if an issue comes up that you have a financial interest in, then you have to refrain from engaging in that. And you're also supposed to not, as an official, represent somebody else. So an official shall not represent any individual or entity before a body on which he or she serves. A city commissioner shall not represent any individual or entity before any body subject to this policy. However, there are 2 exceptions that partly reflects our being a smaller community. One exception is you can always go to the Board of Reviews review, whether you're on a board or commission or not. If you don't agree with your property taxes, then you can go to the Board of Review and represent yourself and your property or your business in order to protest your taxes. And also, if you are the sole proprietor of a business or a home, you can appear before the, let's see, where is it? Address a zoning or construction matter. So on protesting taxes or on zoning issues, you can, under some circumstances, represent yourself. You can't show favoritism. And then the last thing is administration and enforcement. And again, you can read through this, but I would say basically it is saying this. If there's any question in your mind about whether or not in a particular situation you should vote, you should just ask. You can, as a member of a commission, if you're on the planning commission, you could talk to Mr. Merdeza, who would probably then send you to the city manager. This talks about talking to the city manager about the issue and why you're concerned. If the city manager thinks that it's a gray area, she's probably going to have you talk to the city attorney. You will notice that it says under 6.1, if you've done that, if you have a concern, you talk to the city manager and or the city attorney and they give you advice, and then you follow this procedure. If an official, 1, does this prior to any violation of this policy, 2, truthfully and fully discloses all information requested by the manager or city attorney, and 3, complies with the manager or the city attorney's advice and direction, he or she shall not be subject to sanctions as detailed in the subsection. So in other words, if you have any question, you ask the official, the city manager, the city attorney, they advise you on what to do, you do that, you're fine. That is the best thing to do. So in any, and there have been a number of situations where people have done that, and that's work that has, they followed the advice and there's no problem. As Mr. Howard pointed out, you don't get to just not vote. The state law says that. You can't just say, oh, on this particular issue, I'm just going to abstain because I'd just rather not vote. And I'm sure the reason for that is a concern that sometimes there'd never be enough people to vote on any controversial issue. They just say, yeah, I think I'll pass on this one. So if you're on a commission, you have to vote. So there has to actually be a legitimate reason for you not to vote. So sometimes you might say to the city manager or the city attorney, I just don't think I should vote on this. They then say to you, well, technically it's okay. You can vote on this. There isn't really any law that says you can't vote on it. And you still think, no, it still just doesn't feel right. That's what B, under the disclosures, under administration is talking about. It says, if regardless of compliance with this policy, an official strongly believes that due to a close family or friendship relationship, he or she would find it very difficult to objectively participate in a matter before the body on which the official serves, the official may ask the remaining members of the body on which the official serves to excuse the official from his or her duty to otherwise participate in the discussion and action on the matter. The remainder of the body, by a majority vote, may excuse the official's participation. An official shall have no duty to, the rest just says you don't have to ask, they don't have to respond, but if that's how you feel about it, if you'd really rather not vote anyway, and you let the rest of the commission know, the ZBA, whatever commission you're on, you let them know, I just don't feel comfortable about this, and they say, fine, you don't have to vote, then you don't have to vote. If they say, well, really, that's not that big a deal and we think you should vote, then you have to vote. That's basically what it says in the Code of Ethics. And it gives us just a couple minutes for any questions you might have. Jeremy and Nancy, do you both want to?
Anybody have any questions on any of the stuff we've covered so far? Pretty compelling stuff, isn't it?
Right.
Okay,
Okay,
nobody
well,
has
great,
any
thanks.
general questions then. What we can do is have you break up into your groups with your staff liaison, and we'll just do like some back in that corner, some up here. I'll just let you kind of spread out throughout the room, and they'll go over some specific things to your board and commission, and the rest of us will be hanging around in case you have anything you want to ask us one-on-one. So again, before we break up, thanks again, not only for coming tonight, but thank you for your service to our community. We really could not do the things we do in the city of Mount Pleasant without dedicated volunteers like those of you that are here tonight and will watch this throughout the year. So thank you very much for the sacrifices you make in doing this for your community. We appreciate it. And with that, we'll break into groups.